Hey makers, this is Ann. Welcome to a little embossing tutorial at the Scrappy Scribe. I have some die cuts that I cut out. Some of these are from the Tim Holtz designs and some are cut out on my Cricut. So I have a combination of things from the Vagabond and also that I cut out from my Cricut design space. So I'm just going to use a variety of little pieces here, and I'm going to use several different embossing powders, and I'm going to use several different things from pins to embossing pads. So these are the ones I cut out on my Vagabond, and then I cut one of these out just to kind of play with, but I don't really have a plan for that one, so just cut that one out for fun. And then all these other little keys I cut out from Cricut Design Space. I have a subscription to Cricut Design Space, and if you've never subscribed and you have a Cricut, that's a great thing because then you have access to all the images for a year and you just renew that annually. So these three keys came from there. And the keys were the main thing that I was focusing on because of the Heart of Thanksgiving devotional that I'm currently working on. So I just wanted to have some embossed keys, and I used a variety of powders from silver to gold. I put these samples on the tops myself. This one is kind of a speckled, and then I have a copper. Yeah, so the clear ones I didn't really put a sample on, and I love this sparkle one. This is the newest one that I just bought within the last year, so I haven't played with it too much. Now these embossing markers I've had for a long time. They're made by Marvy. I'm not even sure that they're still available. I'll have to look that up. If I find them, I can always link it below. So on these first keys, I decided just to do a little touch here and there and not emboss the entire key. I just wanted to put a few spots just to kind of give it, maybe kind of a little aged look. So I just dabbed a little bit with this clear embossing marker, and I kept everything to the right side. And then this first one I did in silver. I really like the way this one turned out. The light's catching it good there, so you can see where it's just along that right edge, and just gave a little bit of effect to it. And then the next one, I decided to just go ahead and lay it right on top of my large embossing pad. It has so many little intricate details in the top, and I wanted to just try and get the embossing powder all over the entire key this time. So I just tapped it down a little bit with my tweezers, trying not to push too hard. It's real easy to bend those really tiny, intricate little swirls in the top. Again, I'm still using the silver embossing powder on this one. And you'll see that this one turns out quite differently. It didn't cover completely across the top, but rather gave it kind of a speckled look, which I really like that. I like the way that turned out. It kind of makes it look aged and used. So I like the way that one turned out. And then the last one in the grays here that I'm going to do is the one with the heart at the top. This one I am completely covering with the embossing marker, or at least trying to. I mean, you can always miss spots here and there. But I knew that I wanted to use this one for week 1 of my Heart of Thanksgiving devotional book. And so I wanted to cover this one completely. And for this one, I'm using the new embossing powder, the Sparkle, that I just recently bought. And I haven't played with this one very much, so I'm anxious to see how this one turns out. But it just has a real pretty sparkle to it. So when you are using the tweezers on these really intricate little designs, sometimes the tweezers will knock the embossing powder off before you heat set it. I had that happen later on one of the keyholes, which you'll see in the video. But it's real easy to take an embossing marker and just go back and tap the one spot. But yeah, this is really sparkly. I love the way this turned out. It just really has kind of a glittery, and I can see a couple of spots that I missed, but that's all right. So then these next ones are cut out of it's a little heavier cardstock, and it's kind of in between a gold and a bronze color. And I'm using the embossing marker in dark brown on this. I wished I'd had kind of a copper colored marker, but I had dark brown, so that's what I used. And on this one, the color isn't really going to show up so much because I am putting a colored embossing powder on it, but it does help me to see where I've put the embossing marks. So that's kind of nice. So if you have a solid color like gold or copper or whatever, and you have a colored marker, it is kind of nice if you want to see where you're putting those marks for embossing. And so then I just went ahead and sprinkled my copper color down on there. And I gave these a little bit of shake here and there just to make sure that I had them covered. And you can see right there where the embossing powder went everywhere that I colored with that brown marker. And this embossing powder I love. This coppery color is beautiful, super rusty colored looking. So I like the way that one turned out too. Might have been even better on a copper colored paper. And then again, I'm doing the pressing down on the embossing pad again. This one is a keyhole. And this was actually an unintentional die cut. I was cutting extra keys and the keyhole was on the corner of my paper. So you can see that it's cut off on the top and the right hand side. But I went ahead and used it because I decided that when I put it on a page in my devotional, I could line it up with the edges of my page corner. And so I just went ahead and embossed it, and I did end up actually using this in my devotional, and I love the way it looks. And again, when you press it down on top of that embossing pad, I tried to press this one down a little bit more than I did the gray key. And so you can see right there is that little spot where my tweezers were. This one did get covered more with the embossing powder than the key did, and I think just because it was more solid and I was able to press it down more on the embossing pad. But all I did was take that clear embossing marker, and you can use any embossing marker for this, and I just colored in that one little spot and then put some more embossing powder on there and heat set it again. And after I did that little touch up, you couldn't even tell that my tweezers had kind of left a spot there. It turned out fine. So, and I love the way this looks, this copper color, and I like the fact that it's kind of bumpy on top. It just makes it really look like old metal. So that turned out really cool. So these next two gold ones I did with the gold embossing powder, and I went ahead and did them at the same time. First, I went ahead and used the marker to just do a little bit on the right hand side. And then on the other one, I went ahead and laid it down on my embossing pad, just like before, and decided to go ahead and just assembly line these two. Go ahead and put the embossing fluid and then the embossing powder and heat set them both at the same time. So when you're working on an embossing project, we know that embossing gets pretty messy, and you've got your powders out and you're already making the mess, so why not go ahead and cut out multiples, even if you only need one or two of something. And that was my thought when I cut these keys out, was I knew I wanted some embossed keys for my current devotional, but at the same time, I thought I'm already cutting, so I might as well cut several, and I'm already embossing, so I might as well emboss several and just assembly line it. That way I already have them done, the mess is cleaned up, and then I have a stash so that when I want an embossed hardware piece, I've already got them done. So sometimes it's kind of nice just to take an hour or so and just go ahead and work on making some of your own ephemera and die cutting and embossing and just getting it done so that when you want to have it ready, it's already done. And I just figured I'm making the mess, so I might as well only make the mess once and go ahead and do as many cutouts as I can. These keys kept wanting to fly away from my tweezers, so that was kind of fun. So here's the one where it's just on the edge, just a little bit there, and then this one is where I basically covered the whole key. And of course, when you cover the whole key, it thickens it up as well, so it makes it a little sturdier So depending on what you're using it on, you know. The other thing that you could do is if I were to cut out 2 of these keys and then flip my paper, so I basically had a mirror image, and then I could glue them together and emboss them on the front and the back. And by doing that, I would have a very sturdy piece that I could use even for like a charm type thing or something if I wanted to. Even though it's made out of paper, I'd have the embossing powder on both sides of it. So these next 2 are kind of a sandstone. It's a brown bronzy with kind of little flecks of lighter tan in it, and I love the way these turned out. It's a whole different look. It's kind of like a sandstone effect, I guess. But they both look very old and kind of rusty looking. So, and here you can see the difference between that one and the copper. And I will note these colors in the description down below so that you know what colors I used. I'll just go ahead and put that down so that you can see that. So yeah, so completely different look, and I like both of them, but that one definitely looks real rusty looking. Then I decided to go ahead and do the little Viewmaster wheel with the same brown sandstone-y type stuff. And I like the way it turned out. I kind of scribbled on one side just to see what it would look like, and then put it heavier on the other side. And I don't know what I'll use this for. I may even end up cutting it in half, or I may end up putting more embossing powder on that right side. I don't really like the scribbles on this one. Just didn't turn out the way that I had kind of envisioned. So here are the different colors that I did. So there's that copper, and then kind of the brown and sparkly and gold and the silver. So a lot of fun. Now, just to show you a couple of other things that I did from my Heart of Thanksgiving printables, I decided to go ahead and play with those just a little bit. Here's another embossing marker. This one has a wide chisel point on one end and a narrow fine point on the other, and it's made by Zig. So I decided to just play with some of the washi tape here from the printables. And on this one, I am just doing a really fine line in between those little oval shapes, and just thought I would give it a little bit of texture. It's not a lot of embossing because the line in between is very fine. I use the fine tip on the pen, but it just gives it a little bit of texture and adds a little something to that washi. So I like the way that turned out. On this blue strip, I used the wider end of the pen and decided to just fill in the edges of some of these larger leaves. And I'm just going to use the clear embossing powder on this one just to add a little bit of texture to the washi strip. And that turned out well too. It actually kind of brightened up the blue of the paper underneath, and then it gave it that nice raised texture. So I like the way this one turned out, and it just makes that washi a little bit more interesting. So kind of fun. And then I decided to put a little bit of color on these file cards. And with this one, again, I'm using the colored embossing markers, just the light pink and the dark pink, and just kind of pulling out little sections that were already colored in the printing, but I'm just basically kind of going over top of those. Now, you could use a clear embossing marker for the same technique, and I actually do that on one of the other cards. But again, the color is nice to see where you're actually laying the embossing fluid down. And the bright pink here actually is brighter than the pink that was printed on there. So it does add a little bit of extra color in there when I do that. And then on the second card, I went ahead and used my clear and did the entire rows. So a couple of different techniques here just to see the differences, but the first one was just those small edges and just kind of highlighting some little parts of the flowers. where on this middle card I went ahead and did the clear embossing on the entire rose just to make that rose pop out. Now on the last one, I'm actually using a zig glue pen, and you can use these glue pens for embossing and gold foiling and different things, but you have to let them dry a little bit so they're not wet but tacky, and so that just helps to get the powders and the gold leafing and stuff to stick better, though it's not really wet. So just some different ways that you can emboss using different tools that you have, whether it's an embossing pad or an embossing pen or a glue pen or whatever you have. There's a lot of different ways you can do embossing. You can do small details, you can do large areas, you can even emboss an entire item like we did on the key. I hope this was helpful if you're new to embossing, and thank you for watching at the Scrappy Scribe. See you next time. Bye.